How you doing, everybody? Ken Bikoff along with Mike Pegram. And Mike, what a shocker.
Yeah.
The Hoosiers didn't have any kind of bubble to worry about. Talk about IU's 7-10 matchup with the Wichita State Shockers.
It was, right off the bat, you got the news. There was no drama. We spent all the last 24 hours trying to build everybody up, talking about ESPN and how they had taken Indiana out of the field. But in the end, they weren't even in the play-in game, going to Omaha to take on the 7-seed Wichita. So a 10-7, those are often hard games to predict. So it's a good matchup in terms of it's not a huge team. Mm-hmm. Bad matchup in terms of Omaha's going to be pouring with Kansas and Wichita State fans, because Kansas is sitting there waiting at the 2 seed, waiting for that next game. But you can't complain being a 10 seed given the 5-9 finish for Indiana. So all things considered, this was a good news day for Indiana.
Yeah, you look at it, it's a Big Ten team. You have a Missouri Valley Conference team, but it's not exactly as if Wichita State is a team that just squeaked in. I mean, this team has lost 5 games in the past 2 years and has an experienced roster. You have Fred VanVleet, who's going to be a tough matchup and a good guy to kind of match Yogi Ferrell. And then you have Ron Baker, their leading scorer, and he's just a tough kid overall.
Well, their guards are tremendous. I think their guards are in the running for the best backcourt in the nation. They're as veteran as they come with Baker and VanVleet and VanVleet. Takeli Cotton is kind of a quasi-wing guard forward, a really tough, and in fact that might be even the toughest matchup in terms of because physical guys like a Des Wells just killed Indiana on Friday night, and that's what Cotton's going to be for Wichita State. And everybody knows Greg Marshall's a great coach. They play really good defense, so I think they're in the top 20 defensively, top 15 actually, as I cheat and look over my Pomeroy rankings, because we're scrambling here and we haven't had much time to kind of take it all in. But Wichita State guards you. So in some way they're a little bit like Purdue maybe, but lacking the A.J. Hammonds on the other side.
Now, the challenge, of course, for Indiana is, or I guess maybe not the challenge, but, well, the challenge will be to speed up Wichita State, because it's not a team that has great depth. You know, it is a team that relies a lot on its starters, puts them in for a lot of minutes. You have VanVleet and Baker who really run the show. But it's not a team that really goes deep into its bench. Indiana might have a little bit of an advantage there because they do tend to go a little bit deeper, and if they could push the tempo, that might be kind of working in the Hoosiers' favor.
Yeah, it's going to be a battle of tempo for sure, because Wichita is very good at slowing it down. They're very much like Wisconsin, especially the Wisconsin teams of a couple of years ago when they weren't as offensively firepowered as they are today. And that's been a problem, as you know, and he has only beaten Wisconsin once in forever. That can Wichita control the pace? VanVleet is a really good match. In fact, I remember watching Fred VanVleet go against Yogi Ferrell and get the best of him up in Maryville, Indiana, when they were both high school seniors to be. And VanVleet wasn't ranked, and I think he might have been committed to Wichita State at the time, but I wasn't sure. But I was looking at that kid. He didn't fit the looks test when you watch him go out in the court playing for some AU team you never heard of, and they went and just wiped up with Indiana Elite and all their high-ranked kids, and because he just controlled that game, and that's what VanVleet's going to do. He's going to control that game, and with guys like Cotton and Ron Baker is just a lights-out shooter, and long, a really tough matchup for Indiana, because you got to figure Yogi's going to have to take VanVleet. Now, who's going to slow down Baker, because he's so smart and such a good shooter, and can get out in the break and do some things. This is a team that I think. It doesn't turn the ball over, and it really is one that doesn't beat itself.
Yeah, and those matchups are going to be so important, because if Indiana goes man-to-man, Yogi's going to have to be on VanVleet. Yogi has been used a lot of times to guard the post, and now you have to turn to someone else, whether it be Colin Hartman, whether it be Hunter Mosquera-Perea, if he's healthy enough to play. And, again, we haven't heard an update really on Hunter, but it's going to be a challenge for this team to get into the tournament and bring their game at the highest level, especially since you have an experienced Wichita State team and a bunch of guys for IU who are going to be making their first appearance in the NCAA Tournament.
Yeah, Wichita State in the Final Four 2 years ago, number one all year and undefeated until Kentucky got them late in the tournament before the Final Four last year. They are not quite as good inside, but Darius Carter is a veteran and is a strong 6'8"-ish type. Has gotten better over the season. I think he averages around double figures and leads them in rebounding. So they are okay inside, enough that you have to really respect them, which opens things up for their guards. But they aren't. I wouldn't call them a great offensive team.
Yeah.
And that's what cost them against Northern Iowa, cost them against Illinois State. I watched them play at Utah and lose. They're not as good offensively as they were last year,
right,
but they are still that defensive team. They still have veteran guards, and they won't beat themselves down the stretch of a game.
Now, the biggest question to me is whether the team that played in the Indiana team that played in the Big Ten tournament is going to show up, or will it be the Indiana team that showed up a little bit in late February and early March? To me, it's which Indiana team shows up that is going to play a big key here.
Yeah, and that'll have a lot, I think, to do with the tempo. If Wichita State slows it down, and of course getting off to a good start for them would help, they'll have a lot of fans in there for them, because we were out in Portland 2 years ago. You see all those Shocker fans, and that was before they had all that Final Four glory. So they've really built up that support, and Omaha being so close. It's going to be very interesting the first 10 minutes of that game to see if Wichita State can play at their pace, get a solid lead, and make it their kind of game, and frustrate the Hoosier shooters, because Indiana's going to have to find ways to get open looks against that team.
To me, the X factor in this game for the Hoosiers is going to be Troy Williams. His athleticism is something that the Shockers really can't match in any way, and a lot of teams can't. Who's your guy?
Yeah, I think that's it really jumped out at me too. Was Troy Williams being an athlete that you don't see in the Missouri Valley very often. And just the Kelly Cotton will probably get that matchup a little bit, but if they do that, then they've got to switch another guy off, maybe Robert Johnson, which might be an advantageous for Indiana to free him up for jumpers. So they have some of their own issues with matching up with Indiana. So it'll be interesting. And then we got Kansas sitting there waiting for the winner, probably because they are the 2 seed and have a little bit easier time with the 15 seed. And being in Omaha, they're going to send tons of people. Yeah,
and also being a lower seed, Indiana is probably going to go into this one as an underdog. And IU and Tom Crean have tended to do a little bit better when, I guess, they feel that the world is against them a little bit. And that certainly will be the case this time around.
Yeah, and you've seen a lot of times where a team makes a long run and has a great season, and the very next year they just go out right away. It's just a different feeling when you've been there before. Don't quite have that edge in the tournament. And you are the favorite. Mm-hmm. And I imagine Wichita State would be a slight favorite in this game.
And the Shockers, by that same token, they really kind of had a little bit of a letdown in the Missouri Valley Conference tournament. They expected to go through and win that. They lose to Illinois State. They will be a little bit fresher, but they also, I'm sure, will be a little bit hungry to get back on the winning track. So Indiana does have a challenge in front of it.
Yeah, like it's a good point. A lot of times you lose that conference tournament and you get upset and you regroup. Or it could be a rut. You never know, and that's what's fun about the tournament. And playing Friday, both teams are going to be well rested. It should be just a great atmosphere.
Yeah, it absolutely will. And like we said, if Indiana would get past Wichita State, they'll likely have to take on Kansas. We're not going to put all of our ducks in front of the. I want to say ducks in front of the cart. That's not the right thing. It is, but should they get there, that's really going to be a challenging matchup. If Indiana knocks off Wichita State, it would have to take on probably Kansas, and that going to be really tough.
And one of the things you talked about, the chip on the shoulder a little earlier, every media outlet's going to be talking about that potential Wichita State-Kansas interstate game, and that's going to be, a feather in Indiana's cap, maybe from a motivational perspective. But if Indiana does survive Wichita State, Kansas has a lot of size. But they're not a vintage Kansas team. They have more losses, and they won the Big 12 again, but they had a lot more losses than they usually have. They don't have quite the point guard play, and they don't really match up well with Yogi Ferrell. So there could be some ways for Indiana to offset the size, but you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself. You had to figure that Indiana would have to play a big team eventually anyway in the tournament, and Wichita is really not that team, but of course defensively and veteran leadership makes them a tough go as well.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, but the bottom line is Indiana didn't have to deal with a bubble. They were a 10 seed, and I know this was a team that was very confident and doesn't feel like it has to kind of redeem itself on proving that it deserves to be in the tournament. This is just a hungry team that's ready to play, the Hoosiers, and I think that they might make a nice showing.
Yeah, I wrote this weekend after the loss to Maryland, the team had gotten much better. It was a much different Indiana team in Chicago than it was maybe at least from the Rutgers win on forward. And if they had played that way they did against Maryland and Northwestern, they would have won some of those games down the stretch. It's just a matter of where they can bring that same energy, because they were really they had their backs against the wall in Chicago. They had to play well. Now that they're in, they relax a little bit and unknowingly relax.
Right.
You just don't know it until you actually step on the court, and it's a different kind of game. You had a couple turnovers early, and all of a sudden that Wichita State defense has you taking shots you don't want to take.
Yeah, it's going to be Indiana's maturity going up against, and just their adjustment with maturity going up against Wichita State's experience, and they certainly are a mature team. It's going to be a challenge for Indiana, but it's going to be one that is going to be intriguing. Of course, Peegs.com is going to have all the coverage that you need of the Hoosiers' trip to the NCAA Tournament. Mike's going to be out in Omaha covering the Hoosiers up close, and be sure to check in all week for previews and, of course, post-game reaction on Friday. And, of course, preview should they survive till Sunday. But first things first, Indiana has to take on and beat Wichita State. So for Mike Pegram, I'm Ken Bikoff. Thanks for watching.
Take care.